When people look at Elon Musk today, they see rockets landing upright, electric cars dominating highways, and a name that has become almost synonymous with innovation. But what most don't see are the 10 relentless years of failure that carved the foundation beneath that success. Before the applause, before the headlines, before the billions, there were sleepless nights, near bankrupt companies, public humiliation, and moments where quitting would have seemed not only reasonable, but logical. After selling PayPal and walking away with financial security, most people would have retired, but instead, Elon poured nearly all his money into two industries experts called impossible for startups: aerospace and electric vehicles. With SpaceX, he faced a brutal reality. Rockets exploded, engineers doubted, investors hesitated. The first Falcon 1 launch failed, the second failed. The third failed. Each explosion wasn't just metal and fuel burning in the sky. It was reputation, credibility, and millions of dollars vanishing in seconds. Critics labeled him a reckless billionaire playing with toys. Media outlets questioned his competence. And internally, cash was evaporating at a terrifying pace. At one point, he had enough money left for only one more launch attempt. One more chance before the company would collapse. Simultaneously, Tesla Inc. was bleeding money. Production delays stacked up. The Roadster faced engineering problems. Costs spiraled. Investors grew impatient. During the 2008 financial crisis, when the global economy trembled, Tesla was weeks away from bankruptcy. Elon had to choose how to divide his last remaining funds between SpaceX and Tesla, knowing that either decision might still end in failure. He was borrowing money for rent while being publicly portrayed as a billionaire genius. That decade taught him something few successful people admit. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the training ground for it. Every rocket explosion became data. Every production delay became a lesson. Every near bankruptcy became a stress test for resilience. Instead of retreating, he leaned deeper into the discomfort. He slept on factory floors. He worked 100-hour weeks. He demanded brutal honesty from engineers and from himself. Failure stripped away ego and forced clarity. It taught him that optimism without execution is delusion, but execution without resilience is impossible. Those 10 years hardened his risk tolerance. They trained him to detach emotionally from public opinion and attach obsessively to problem solving. When Falcon 1 finally succeeded on the fourth launch in 2008, it wasn't luck. It was the cumulative weight of three catastrophic lessons refined into precision. NASA awarded SpaceX a contract soon after, not because the company had never failed, but because it had proven it could learn faster than it failed. Meanwhile, Tesla survived its darkest hour by securing last-minute funding, literally, on Christmas Eve. The lesson wasn't that bold dreams guarantee success. It was that survival depends on adaptability, endurance, and irrational levels of persistence. For Elon, those 10 years proved that innovation requires tolerating embarrassment. It requires betting on yourself when even smart people think you're wrong. It requires understanding that pain is temporary, but regret is permanent. He often says that if something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. That belief wasn't born in victory. It was forged in those lonely years when failure was the only visible outcome. The world celebrates the rocket's landing, but it was the rocket's exploding that truly built him. The second lesson those 10 years of failure taught Elon Musk was that vision must be stronger than fear. Starting an electric car company when giants like Ford and GM dominated the market sounded irrational. Starting a private space company when only governments had succeeded sounded delusional. Yet Elon wasn't chasing industries. He was chasing missions, sustainable energy, and making humanity multiplanetary. When Tesla's early prototypes malfunctioned, when batteries overheated, when production targets were missed repeatedly, he faced not just financial stress, but credibility collapse. Analysts predicted bankruptcy. Short sellers bet aggressively against Tesla. Headlines mocked missed deadlines. But failure refined his leadership philosophy. Instead of accepting industry norms, he questioned first principles. Why must rockets cost hundreds of millions? Why can't batteries be engineered differently? Why should cars remain dependent on fossil fuels? Failure pushed him to strip problems down to physics rather than precedent. At SpaceX, instead of outsourcing everything, he vertically integrated manufacturing to control cost and quality. At Tesla, he obsessed over manufacturing efficiency, learning that production is often harder than prototyping. The infamous production hell during the Model 3 ramp-up nearly broke the company. Robots malfunctioned. Assembly lines stalled. Cash flow tightened dangerously. Elon admitted later that excessive automation was a mistake. Humans were underrated. That humility came from failure, not success. Those 10 years taught him that arrogance kills companies faster than competition. They also revealed the psychological cost of ambition. His personal life faced turbulence. Stress spilled into relationships. Public scrutiny intensified. Every tweet was analyzed. Every misstep amplified. Failure forced him to confront emotional endurance as much as technical competence. He learned that leadership means absorbing fear so your team can focus. When employees worried about payroll, he projected confidence, even when internally uncertain. He once said that running his companies felt like staring into the abyss and chewing glass. That metaphor wasn't dramatic exaggeration. It described daily reality. Yet each crisis strengthened strategic patience. When early Tesla investors pressured him for safer decisions, he doubled down on long-term innovation instead of short-term optics. When SpaceX critics dismissed reusable rockets as fantasy, he continued iterative testing despite explosions. The breakthrough landings years later weren't sudden miracles. They were the compounding result of refusing to treat failure as final. Those years also reshaped his relationship with risk. Most people fear losing what they have. Elon had already achieved wealth from PayPal, but instead of protecting it, he reinvested nearly all of it. Failure taught him that comfort breeds stagnation. Risk, when calculated and mission-driven, accelerates learning. He became comfortable operating on the edge of collapse because he had survived it before. That mental conditioning became a competitive advantage. Investors began to recognize a pattern. When his companies were closest to failure, they were also closest to breakthrough. The decade of setbacks trained him to remain calm in chaos. It embedded a bias toward action rather than hesitation. It also reinforced that bold timelines create urgency, even if they're missed. Critics focus on missed deadlines, but internally, those aggressive targets forced innovation cycles faster than industry norms. Ultimately, those 10 years revealed a brutal truth. Extraordinary outcomes require enduring extraordinary pressure. Vision without resilience fades at the first obstacle. But vision fueled by repeated failure becomes unstoppable moment. The final and perhaps most transformative lesson that 10 years of failure taught Elon Musk is that endurance is a superpower, and persistence, when aligned with purpose, can outlast almost any obstacle. By the time both SpaceX and Tesla Inc. began stabilizing, Elon was no longer the same entrepreneur who had confidently entered aerospace and automotive industries believing intelligence and capital would be enough. Failure had reshaped his psychology. It stripped away any illusion that vision alone guarantees execution. It forced him to confront the brutal gap between idea and implementation. Rockets don't succeed because of ambition. They succeed because of relentless iteration. Cars don't scale because of hype. They scale because manufacturing bottlenecks are solved one painful constraint at a time. A decade of setbacks taught him that progress is rarely dramatic. It is incremental, technical, and often invisible to outsiders. When Falcon rockets failed in early launches, each explosion was dissected frame by frame. Engineers searched for microscopic flaws in design, software, fuel systems, and structural integrity. What the public saw as catastrophic endings, the internal teams treated as data-rich beginnings. This mindset, treating failure as feedback rather than finality, became cultural DNA. It meant no mistake was wasted. It meant embarrassment was temporary, but learning was permanent. Over time, that philosophy transformed SpaceX into a company capable of landing reusable boosters with precision once considered impossible. The same applied to Tesla. During production hell, when Model 3 assembly lines jammed and automation backfired, Elon famously admitted that humans were underrated and excessive robotics had been a mistake. That admission reflected maturity forged by failure. 10 years earlier, ego might have resisted that conclusion. Now, survival mattered more than pride. He slept on factory floors not for optics, but because proximity to the problem accelerated solutions. Failure had taught him that leadership requires immersion, not distance. It also taught him emotional detachment from volatility. Stock prices surged and crashed. Public opinion oscillated between genius and fraud. Through it all, the mission remained steady: accelerate sustainable energy and expand humanity beyond Earth. That clarity insulated him from the psychological whiplash that destroys many founders. When critics attacked, he focused on engineering. When praise surged, he returned to execution. A decade of near collapse had conditioned him to value substance over sentiment. Another profound lesson was resource allocation under extreme pressure. During the 2008 financial crisis, when both Tesla and SpaceX were on the brink, he divided his remaining capital between them instead of preserving one at the expense of the other. That decision was not reckless optimism, it was mission-driven logic. Failure had clarified his priorities. If both missions were essential to the future, then both deserved survival attempts. That willingness to risk personal security for long-term impact became a defining trait. It signaled to employees and investors that commitment was absolute. Over time, that credibility attracted top engineering talent willing to endure intense workloads because the mission felt authentic. Failure also taught him pacing. Early in his career, timelines were aggressively optimistic. Rockets would launch sooner, cars would scale faster. Reality intervenes. Repeatedly. Yet instead of abandoning urgency, he refined it. Aggressive deadlines remained, but iteration became faster and more systematic. Each delay provided insight into supply chains, material science, regulatory frameworks, and human psychology. Over 10 years, these compounded lessons built operational muscle that competitors underestimated. The companies that once teetered on bankruptcy evolved into industry leaders not because they avoided mistakes, but because they metabolized them efficiently. Psychologically, those years built resilience against fear. When you have stood at the edge of losing everything multiple times and survived, the next crisis feels survivable too. That conditioning reduced hesitation in future bold decisions, developing reusable rockets, building gigafactories at unprecedented speed, pushing battery innovation aggressively. Failure had normalized discomfort. It reframed risk as tuition rather than threat. There was also a philosophical shift. Success is not a destination, but a continuation of iteration. Even after breakthroughs, like successful booster landings or Tesla's profitability, he continued pushing boundaries. The hunger persisted because the mission remained incomplete. Mars was not yet reached. Global energy was not yet fully sustainable. 10 years of failure instilled a long-game mentality. Quarterly results mattered, but decades mattered more. Perhaps most importantly, failure humanized the journey. It revealed that doubt is constant, even for visionary leaders. There were nights of uncertainty, moments when outcomes were unclear, when exhaustion blurred judgment. But endurance meant acting despite uncertainty. It meant making decisions with incomplete data and accepting accountability for consequences. That capacity, to move forward without guarantees, became a defining advantage. In hindsight, the explosions, the producti on chaos, the financial brinkmanship, and the public skepticism were not detours from success. They were prerequisites. Without them, there would be no culture of radical iteration at SpaceX, no manufacturing rigor at Tesla, no hardened resolve capable of sustaining massive ambition. The world often celebrates visible milestones: rockets landing vertically against sunset skies, electric cars outselling expectations, but beneath those milestones lies a decade of invisible persistence. 10 years of failure taught Elon Musk that resilience compounds, that mission anchors momentum, and that extraordinary achievements are rarely clean or comfortable. They are forged in repetition, stress, correction, and stubborn belief. Ultimately, the deepest lesson was simple yet brutal. If the mission matters enough, you endure long enough for probability to shift in your favor. Failure does not disappear, it evolves into refinement. And persistence, sustained over years rather than weeks, transforms impossibility into inevitability.